So, Ursula Brandstaetter, your turn.
It's my turn.
So, first question. What comes up for you in your first encounter with the whole fabric of artworks in the exhibition?
My first experience was, I was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed in a positive sense, but also a little overburdened. I knew the subject, the topic of the exhibition, I knew the project, and therefore I knew the subject is antimatter. And as I knew it, there were a lot of claims in me, and I had the feeling, oh, I should understand what is the connection, what is meant with this picture, and so on. But I didn't be successful in understanding, and therefore my first experience was an experience of not understanding. And this is an experience which is very familiar for me and which I like. It's positive for me because I deal with contemporary art, and it's a typical experience I do and I like. Why do I like it? Because it motivates me to go further, to have a closer look to the things. It is an experience kind of tension, and therefore it's also an energetic, an experience of energy. And the energy gives me, the energy produces questions, and I think if we are confronted with art which produces questions, this is the right thing. Just some ideas to the topic. I would like to speak a little bit about the term transformation, about the term aesthetic. Then I will give a closer look to the combination of the two terms, aesthetic transformation in general, and at last I will think about the specific role of aesthetic transformation in the project load. These are the steps of my thinking about the project. The term transformation. It's a really interesting term. It has so many meanings, so many connotations. You know, we speak about social transformation, we speak about physical transformation, musical transformation, and so on. What I find interesting is that the term is used in very different contexts, as well in scientific contexts, in context of humanities, and also in an artistic context. It also is a musical term. And now you have to ask, what is the common idea of all these ways of using and applying the term? I think first it's a real simple idea. The common idea maybe is the process of change and the process of conversion. That's the right word. I don't now with the term aesthetic. When in Germany or in Austria, where I live currently, I use the term aesthetic. Everybody thinks immediately of beauty. In the German language, aesthetic is linked to the idea of beauty. I don't know if it's the same thing in English. But now, an important idea. The philosophical term, aesthetic, has another meaning. It derives from the Greek word aesthesis. And this means perception. And therefore, when I speak about aesthetic transformation, this is linked to the perception and to the senses. This is an important idea regarding to the project flow. Because the topic of antimatter we know is a topic which can't be perceived. And therefore it's a real great challenge for the artists to make this non-perceptible topic perceptible. In general, maybe this is one main goal of art. I like to remember a very famous quotation of the German painter Paul Klee. He said, art makes visible the invisible. Art makes visible the invisible. Now let's have a closer look to what aesthetic transformation in general could be. In general, in artistic context. Whenever artists work, they deal with transformation. The starting point of a work of art can be an idea, a concept, material, imagination, or whatever. What they do is they transform the idea, the concept, the material. Therefore, whatever they do is rooted in a historical and actual context. Everything they do is rooted in a tradition of how the material is treated, of how ideas exist. But what is important, artists try to transform the tradition. And they try to find something new. So the general meaning of aesthetic transformation could be in this sense. Now, this is important, what are the specific features of aesthetic transformation in the project law? There are differences. First difference, compared to the general meaning of aesthetic transformation, is the framework is designed consciously. You all know the communication is strictly regulated. And this makes a great difference, because now we have to deal with an aesthetic transformation which works intentionally. There's a difference between processes of aesthetic communication which work automatically and other ones which work intentionally. I come to the second point of my reflections. In my view, therefore, aesthetic transformation is in a certain way a topic of the project. I know the project has a topic antimatter, but it does not only deal with the topic antimatter, with the physical topic, but it deals with the possibilities and challenges in general, how art can transform physical ideas and how art can transform physical presentation and vice versa. In this sense, for me, the project law is an art project which is self-reflexive and self-reflecting. It reflects upon the approaches of art in generating knowledge. Aesthetic transformation in law not only is a methodology, but it is a kind of art practice. As we already heard, and as Margit says, in a basic sense, transformation means linking two phenomena. The two phenomena are linked by associations and by discovering similarities. Let's have a closer look. On the one hand, there is a starting point. The starting point was a lecture of physicists. It was a presentation of the topic of antimatter out of the view of physicists. Therefore, the topic of antimatter was presented and explained by physicists with the aid of words, drawings, diagrams, quotations, and so on. The starting point were physical media of communication. On the other hand, regarding to the result, now there are artworks which are inspired by the physical ideas. And these artworks use aesthetic media. It's drawing, photographs, films, etc. And now there arise two questions, I think. First question, what is the basis for linking the two phenomena? And second question, very interesting question, what is the difference between the physical media and the aesthetic media? What does make the difference? And I will try to give some hints in answering these two questions. First question, on which mechanism is transformation based on? If you focus in the first step the persons who are involved, transformation is based on the attempt of mutual understanding. And we all know that is not very easy, and we all make the experience. There is also a kind of misunderstanding and not understanding in the beginning, and maybe also in the end. If you focus not on the persons, not on the people who are involved, but on the presentations which are linked together, transformation is based on analogous thinking, as we already heard. You try to find out similarities on whatever level you want. And in this sense, transformation means that you put out a phenomenon out of the context. You excavate it. I don't know if this is the right word. You excavate phenomenon out of the context and out of a specific media of presentation. You put it out of a media. And this is a process of generalizing abstraction. Abstraction is going on when artists work, and vice versa. We decontextualize in putting out, and we recontextualize. These two processes are linked together. And the result is a shift of meaning, because meaning is defined by the media and by the context. And when you change media and context, there will be a shifting of the meaning. Now to the second question, what is the difference between scientific media and artistic media? First of all, there are no specific scientific media and there are no specific artistic media per se. We all know drawings exist as well in a scientific context as well as in an artistic context. The difference is produced by the way we use the media. This makes the difference. And there's a interesting quotation, also a famous quotation of the Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. I don't know if I translated well. The meaning of a sign is constituted by how it is used and applied. It's a very important idea. It is the how you use a sign, how you use the media, how you read them. This is the point which decides if you do a scientific knowledge or an artistic experience. Now, some aspects of difference, nevertheless, between the types of media. The goal of scientific media and scientific presentation is to be clear and to be defined, whereas artistic media tend to be ambiguous. This is the difference you all know. In consequence, scientific presentation wants to be understood, whereas artworks want to be experienced. Artworks open a wide range of meaning, a wide range of connotations. And now I would like to recall that the original meaning of aesthetic, which is rooted in the perception and in the senses. Aesthetic media want to be perceived with all the senses, with the body. And therefore, whereas scientific media don't give attention to the bodily experience. The scientific signs tend to disappear behind the meaning of the signs. And you also could say scientific media is in a certain way unsensuous. So far, good.
You've touched on some of this already, but I will just put it out in case there's something else you want to add to this last question. What is aesthetic thinking, and how do you think it is operating in the results of this leading out of windows process?
You already spoke a lot about analogous thinking compared to and contrasted to logical thinking, and in philosophy there are multifold attempts to describe different ways of thinking. And I now will try to focus on aesthetic thinking. What could it be, and what are features of aesthetic thinking? It's a kind of summing up the ideas I already mentioned before, I think. First, it's not new. Aesthetic thinking is rooted in the senses, is based on sensual experiences, and this concerns as well the producer of artwork, as well the recipient who reads and perceives art. The knowledge that we gain is a kind of embodied knowledge. It is bodily embedded experience. Aesthetic thinking deals with ambiguity, and the consequence is, in aesthetic thinking, the difference between true and false is not important. There's another difference which is important. It is the difference between evident and non-evident. Application of these reflections for the project now. Regarding the project and its further development, I think the chance lies, as you already practice, in connecting the different ways of thinking. And the main goal is to cultivate and to emphasize on the processes of communication and perhaps also of non-understanding between the partners. Perhaps in the next phase of your project you could shift the perspective a little bit less toward the results, but more to the in-between, what happens in between when scientists and artists try to understand.
My brain is a little exploded right now, so bear with me. Three things really coalesce during your talk. The first is this idea of a kind of a dichotomy between logical and analogical thinking. And for me, logical thinking is just thinking where the level of abstraction is quite low, meaning there's very little freedom interpreting ambiguity. Whereas in analogical thinking, you have the opposite. And for me, that makes it not a dichotomy, but a continuum. That at every step, you could have more and more freedom and flexibility in the interpretation of these signs and symbols and become increasingly abstract. And so for me, there's, a continuum between the two. And then my brain really exploded when I was thinking about that in relationship to default network and executive function. Because we can think about executive function as a kind of rational brain, and the default network is a kind of analogical brain, but I would further complexify that again with the continuum. That perhaps there's this fluidity that's not, we talked a little bit, Brian was mentioning them being kind of off-kilter. You got a lot of one, less of the other, but at least in some studies we have seen that there are more contributions of executive function in, for example, mind wandering than we previously thought. So I think this idea of the continuum and getting away from the dichotomy would be really useful and interesting.
Thank you very much for your contribution, because I totally agree. I think it's important to see the continuum. When I speak about these topics, I simplify. And I open dichotomy. But in reality, the reality is more complex. And there's many phenomena are overlapping. And I'm thankful for the picture of continuum.
Thank you.
You have time for one more question.
Actually, part of my question is precisely that, because I kept thinking, is it because you wanted to set out deliberately?
Yeah, we think we need the mic. You're recording this. I know you have a booming voice, but we need more movement.
Thank you. Yes, part of my question actually was already asked, but what I wanted to say was, I kept thinking, were you deliberately setting up a dichotomy in order to then at the end say, okay, you're interested in seeing what happens with the project as it tries to bridge that continuum? Because I kept thinking, it sounds to me very much like, as a choreographer, I like to think of non-discursive thought. And I was wondering if part of what you were saying in terms of how this bridging happens might involve not only non-discursive thinking, but the notion of affect as non-discursive thinking, a la Guattari and his co-writer.
I understood, I could follow your thoughts, but now I didn't grasp the question.
Okay. Well, it's. I guess it's more of an observation, because in bridging this artificial dichotomy that you were setting up, I was wondering if the solution would be something like non-discursive thinking, or how affect works to bridge that space between logical thinking. Question out. Your solution, because you mentioned the word at the end.
Naturally, I have no solution. I open a field of thoughts, and I open a field of systematic thinking about a complex reality. And I think there is no one way there are so many possibilities of connecting different kinds of thinking together, discursive and non-discursive, verbal and non-verbal, logical and non-logical.
So I guess maybe my question would be, what are some of the ways in which you see this bridging happening? Because I thought you were deliberately setting up a dichotomy. How do you see this continuum operating?
I see this in the...
Give me an example. Give me an example.
For example, when I look at the video with the dancer and the dog, I think there happened a bridging between the two worlds, and between the two worlds of thinking, between the 1,000 worlds of thinking. And it opens and it bridges. This could be a way. And what I'm interested in is to look closer to what is happening. And I'm interested in analyzing. And analyzing always means simplifying.
Perhaps you answer.